Taylor had mastered the art of living invisibly, washing in gas station bathrooms, collecting recyclables for pocket change, sleeping in abandoned buildings and under bridges. But winter was coming, and that night, standing on the overpass, Taylor had reached her limit. A truck horn blared on the highway below. She flinched back from the railing, the sound breaking her dangerous reverie. She looked down at Iris, the one thing tethering her to this world, and something hardened in her eyes. "Not today," she whispered to herself. Pulling her thin coat tighter around her shoulders, Taylor turned back to the shopping cart. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a bone-deep cold that promised frost by morning. Carefully, she adjusted the plastic tarp covering her sleeping daughter. 9-year-old Iris barely stirred, exhausted for hours. "Time to go, sweetie," Taylor said. Iris blinked her eyes open, her large brown eyes foggy with sleep. "A real place?" she asked. "Sort of," Taylor replied, forcing a cheerful tone. "Remember that old mill I showed you last week?" The abandoned Brennan textile mill stood like a forgotten monument on the city's east side. Shuttered since 1987, its windows were shattered, and a chain-link fence plastered with no trespassing signs sagged around its perimeter. But Taylor had spent weeks scouting it, circling it like a cautious animal, marking a spot where the fence had been cut and imperfectly patched with twisted wire. It took them 40 minutes to push the cart across town, avoiding the well-lit areas where police might question them, keeping to the shadows and service alleys. Iris walked beside her, one hand on the cart, the other clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Almost there," Taylor promised, as the mill's hulking silhouette came into view. At the fence, Taylor untwisted the wire she had marked weeks before, creating an opening just wide enough to slip through. She helped Iris in first, then began passing their few belongings through: a backpack of clothes, a small bag of toiletries, 3 precious books, and a plastic bin that served as their kitchen. It held a camp stove she'd found in a dumpster, mismatched utensils, and water bottles. "What about the cart?" Iris asked. "We have to leave it," Taylor told her. "But we'll find another one when we need it." The inside of the mill was cavernous. Broken windows filtered moonlight onto rusted machinery that looked like mechanical skeletons. Iris moved closer to her mother. "It's scary." "It's just a building," Taylor soothed, though she could feel the ghosts of long-vanished lives and livelihoods. "And it's dry. This way." She led Iris toward the back of the mill, where she had discovered an old supervisor's office during her earlier reconnaissance. Unlike the main floor, the office still had an intact door, a dusty desk, and a single grimy window. Most importantly, the roof above it wasn't leaking, leaving the floor relatively dry. "Home sweet home," Taylor announced. Iris stood in the doorway. "For how long?" "I don't know, honey. As long as we can." That night, they swept decades of dust from a corner of the office and spread their blankets on the floor. They dined on peanut butter and stale bread and drank water. Morning brought gray light through the dirty window and a renewed determination. After a breakfast of their last granola bar, split between them, Taylor set about turning their corner of the abandoned mill into something like a home. "School first," she told Iris firmly. "Then we clean." For 3 hours, Taylor homeschooled her daughter as best she could, reading from a tattered library book and working out simple math problems with a pencil stub in the margins of an old newspaper. After lessons came the transformation of their space. Taylor had scavenged rags from a dumpster behind a cleaning company. Using rainwater collected in an old bucket, they scrubbed the floor until the original concrete showed through the layers of grime. Look, Mom, Iris exclaimed, pointing to a cleaner patch. It's actually kind of pretty. Taylor smiled. It really is, isn't it? They hung tarps salvaged from a construction site to divide the space into rooms, a sleeping area, a kitchen area around the camp stove, and what Iris dubbed the living room, which consisted of 2 milk crates for chairs and a wooden cable spool for a table. On this makeshift table, Iris carefully arranged her few precious possessions: the 3 books, her stuffed rabbit, and a framed photograph of Taylor in her nurse's uniform, smiling confidently at the camera. That evening, exhausted but satisfied, they sat on their milk crates and ate beans heated on the camp stove. Outside, the mill's broken windows framed a sky turning orange and pink with the sunset. It's not so bad here, Iris said. No, it's not. Mommy, when are we going home? To a real home? Taylor pulled her daughter close. Honey, home isn't a place. It's us. As long as we're together, we're home. Over the next 3 months, they settled into a routine. Mornings were for lessons. In the afternoons, Taylor would leave Iris, now old enough to be on her own for short periods, while she scavenged for money. She collected cans for recycling, did cash-in-hand odd jobs, cleaning gutters for an elderly man, helping a small diner prep vegetables in the back alley, holding signs on street corners for "Everything Must Go" sales. Each day blurred into the next. They became experts in invisibility, part of the city's scenery. Taylor learned which dumpsters yielded edible leftovers, which cops would pretend not to see them, and which church served a hot meal on Wednesdays. She memorized the schedules of public restrooms, the locations of outdoor spigots where she could fill water bottles, and the spots where free Wi-Fi bled through the library walls, so Iris could occasionally watch educational videos on Taylor's old smartphone. Winter tightened its grip around them. They stuffed the cracks in the factory office with newspaper and rags. Taylor borrowed wooden pallets from behind stores to keep their bedding off the freezing floor. On the coldest nights, they burned candle stubs in a metal can for the illusion of warmth, if nothing else. Through it all, Taylor saved. Pennies became dollars, hidden in an aspirin bottle tucked into her bra. By February, she had amassed $86. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday that Taylor ran into old Luther, a fellow street dweller who scavenged copper wire from derelict buildings. They crossed paths behind the Salvation Army, both hoping to be first in line when the donations were sorted. Morning, Viv. Luther nodded, his gray beard stiff with ice crystals. You and your girl still holing up in the mill? We are, Taylor said. Any copper today? Nah, picked it clean. But I heard something you might be interested in. They're auctioning off storage units over in Riverside this afternoon. Folks don't pay their rent. They lose their stuff. Sometimes you can get a good haul if you've got a few bucks. Taylor thought about it. She'd seen auctions like that on TV, back when she'd had a TV. People would bid on abandoned units, and sometimes find treasures worth thousands. What time? She asked, her hand instinctively touching the aspirin bottle through her layers of clothing. Show up around noon, Luther said. Might be worth a look. Better than freezing out here all day. At noon, Taylor went to get Iris from the mill. We're going on an adventure, she announced. What kind of adventure? Iris asked, skeptical. The kind that might help us, Taylor said. There's an auction. Sometimes people find valuable things, like treasure. Real treasure? Maybe not pirates' gold, but something we can sell. Something to get us through the winter. They took a city bus, using 2 of their precious dollars, to the edge of town where the Riverside self-storage facility sprawled over a large lot. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 20 people, mostly men with pickup trucks and vans who were clearly professionals at this. Taylor and Iris stood off to the side. A bored-looking auctioneer moved methodically down a row of units. The bidding was fast and competitive. Units sold for hundreds of dollars, far beyond Taylor's means. She began to think they had wasted their bus fare. Unit 273, the auctioneer droned. 6 months delinquent. Owner deceased. No next of kin located. Opening at $50. The roll-up door was lifted halfway, revealing what looked like water-damaged boxes, old furniture, and stacks of magazines. Nothing special. The professional buyers didn't even bother to look closely. 50, the auctioneer repeated. Do I hear 50? The number made Taylor step forward. 50, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The auctioneer blinked, surprised to hear a bid on such an unpromising unit. $50, going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the green coat. Mom, what did you do? Iris whispered, her voice tight with worry. What had she done? She'd spent more than half her savings on what looked like junk. A pit formed in Taylor's stomach as she handed over the cash and received a padlock key and a clipboard to sign. You have 48 hours to clear it out, the facility manager told her brusquely. Anything left after that becomes the property of Riverside. As the crowd moved on to the next unit, Taylor and Iris stood alone before their purchase. Iris peered inside, her earlier excitement fading. It's just old junk, she said. Let's get a closer look, Taylor suggested. The smell hit them first. Mildew and neglect, the musty odor of paper left too long in the damp. Inside, the unit was about 10 feet by 10 feet, crammed with the detritus of someone's forgotten life. Cardboard boxes disintegrated at a touch, spilling waterlogged books. A broken dresser listed to one side, 2 drawers missing. Stacks of National Geographic magazines from the 1970s and 80s formed yellowed towers along one wall. In the corner was an old sewing machine, its metal parts thoroughly rusted. Mom! Iris's voice was sharp. That was our food money. Why did you waste it on trash? I don't know, honey, Taylor said quietly. I just had a feeling. Iris kicked at a bag of moldy clothes. We could have bought real food, or a new blanket, or medicine in case I get sick again. I'm sorry, Taylor whispered, fighting back tears. They stood in silence amidst the ruined belongings of a stranger, the weight of Taylor's mistake hanging between them. Maybe we can still find something to sell, Taylor finally offered. Let's at least look through everything before we give up. Reluctantly, Iris nodded. They began to sort through the contents of the locker methodically. The clothes were worthless, eaten by moths and mildew. The magazines might have been valuable to a collector if they hadn't been water damaged. The dresser fell apart completely when Taylor tried to move it. Look, Mom, Iris called out, holding up a small glass paperweight with a preserved butterfly inside. This is pretty. Someone might buy it. Good eye, sweetie. Put it in the keep pile. The keep pile remained pathetically small. The paperweight, a set of relatively intact ceramic mugs, and a silver picture frame, tarnished but salvageable. Nothing that would recoup even a fraction of their $50. As the afternoon wore on, frustration and hunger gnawed at them both. Taylor had packed a single peanut butter sandwich, which they split while sitting on the unit's concrete floor. We should go soon, Taylor said, checking the time on her phone. What about all this stuff? Iris asked. We'll take what we can carry. Maybe we'll come back tomorrow for another look. As Taylor gathered their meager treasures into a plastic bag, Something caught her eye. The back wall of the storage unit had water stains in an unusual pattern. They were straight, geometric lines, not the organic spread of natural water damage. Curious, she moved closer, pushing aside a stack of magazines. The wall was covered in cheap wood paneling, common in the 1970s, but the water stains followed the seams of the panels with an odd precision. Taylor pressed her hand against the paneling. It gave, just slightly. "Iris," she called out, her voice a low hum of excitement. "Come, look at this." Together they studied the wall. Taylor traced her fingers along the edge of a panel, feeling a slight give. She worked her nails into the seam and pulled. The panel shifted, revealing it wasn't fixed to a solid wall. "It's a false wall," she whispered, a thrill rising in her chest. They cleared the space around it. Then, with a firmer grip, Taylor pulled. The panel came away with the sharp crackle of dried adhesive, exposing a narrow cavity behind it, perhaps 2 feet deep. "It's a secret place," Iris breathed, "like in the books." Taylor reached into the darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her fingers brushed against something cold and solid, a metal box. She drew it out carefully. It was a toolbox, heavy and well-made, caked in dust, but with 3 sturdy locks still intact. "What else is in there?" Iris asked, her voice hushed with awe. Taylor reached in again. This time she pulled out a large brown paper envelope, sealed with a blob of red wax. On the front, in a fine spidery script, were the words, "To whoever finds this, I am sorry I did not have the courage." Once more her hand plunged into the void. She retrieved a small, intricately carved wooden box, about the size of a paperback. Taylor laid their discoveries on the floor, staring at them in disbelief. "Open them," Iris urged. Taylor tried the toolbox first. The locks were solid, demanding keys they didn't have. The wooden box, however, opened with a simple click. Inside, 6 black and white photographs lay carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. They showed a man in his late 30s or early 40s, with kind eyes and a confident smile. In one, he stood proudly before a building Taylor recognized with a jolt. The Brennan Textile Mill, their shelter. His arm was draped around a younger woman. Taylor flipped the photo over. A handwritten caption read, "Opening Day, 1962. We were going to change the world, Tommy." "It's our factory," Iris said. "Yeah," Taylor murmured. The wax seal on the envelope crumbled easily, revealing several pages of handwritten letters inside. "It's getting too dark to read in here," Taylor said. "Let's take this back to the mill. We can go through everything properly there." The toolbox was too heavy to carry far. Taylor wrapped it carefully in a relatively clean shirt from the unit, then nestled it into her backpack alongside the envelope and the wooden box. "Should we put the panel back?" Iris asked. Taylor considered it. "No. There's nothing else worth taking, and maybe someone else will find a use for what's left." They just managed to catch the last bus downtown, spending 2 of their precious dollars. The entire ride, the backpack sat heavy on Taylor's lap, its contents a mystery that made her heart race with possibility. Back at the mill, they slipped through the fence as twilight bled into night. The building felt different to Taylor now, imbued with the ghost of the smiling man who had once stood so proudly before it. Inside their makeshift home, Taylor lit the camping lantern, setting it on a wooden crate. Iris carefully arranged their acquisitions: the toolbox, the envelope, the wooden box of photographs. "Can I see the letter?" she asked. "After we eat," Taylor promised. They ate their bland soup quickly, an unspoken urgency hanging in the air. When they finished, Taylor unfolded the letter. The handwriting was tremulous but legible. The ink faded in places. She began to read aloud. My name is Adelaide Brennan. I am 74 years old, and I am a coward. This factory, the Brennan Textile Mill, belonged to my father. When he died in 1975, he left it to me and my brother, Thomas. We ran it together until 1983, when Thomas was killed in a workplace accident. The insurance investigators ruled it an accident. It was not. Taylor's voice faltered. She looked at Iris, whose eyes were wide. This is like a mystery book, the girl whispered. Keep reading, Mom. Taylor continued. Thomas discovered that our floor manager, Dale Pritchett, was running a scheme, falsifying safety inspections and pocketing the money meant for equipment maintenance. Thomas confronted him. 3 days later, the accident happened. Dale made sure he was nowhere near the floor that day. I knew. I had Thomas's journal. He documented everything. I had proof, but Pritchett had connections. Councilmen, police, union bosses, and I was a childless widow who had inherited an empire I never wanted. I was terrified. So I closed the factory, locked Thomas's evidence in this box, and I stayed silent. For 34 years, I have lived with this shame. Taylor stared at the toolbox with dawning comprehension. It didn't hold old tools. It held the evidence of a murder. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to the letter. The toolbox contains Thomas's journal, the forged inspection reports, photographs of the equipment that killed him, and financial records that prove the embezzlement. Also included is the deed to this factory, which is still in my name. I never sold it. I didn't have the heart. And there are access codes to a safe deposit box at First National Bank, Box 891. I am dying now. Cancer. It's too late for courage, I suppose. But maybe whoever finds this will have more strength than I did. Maybe you can do what I could not. Tell the truth. Taylor lowered the letter, her mind reeling. The factory, their shelter, still belonged to the estate of Adelaide Brennan. The toolbox contained proof of a murder, covered up for decades. What does it mean, Mom? Iris asked. It means, Taylor said slowly, that we've found something important. Something that could be very, very significant to the right people. They examined the photographs again. Thomas Brennan's kind face stared back at them across time, a man who had died trying to do the right thing. In another photo, he stood beside a teenage girl. On the back, it read, Tommy and Margaret, fishing trip 1982, her 13th birthday. Margaret, Taylor murmured. That night, sleep eluded Taylor. The toolbox sat in the corner, its 3 locks a frustrating barrier. What secrets did it hold? And more importantly, what was she supposed to do with them? She was homeless, with no credibility. The murder, if that's what it was, had happened almost 40 years ago. Dale Pritchett, the man Adelaide accused, could be dead by now, or still powerful and dangerous. Morning brought the pale light of a February sun and a decision. After their meager breakfast, Taylor told Iris her plan. We're going to the library today. I need to look up some things online about the mill and Thomas Brennan and Dale Pritchett, and we need to see if we can find Thomas's daughter, Margaret. She'd be in her 50s by now. The public library was their usual refuge on cold days. It was warm, safe, and offered free internet and bathrooms with soap and hot water. They arrived as it opened at 9 and claimed a quiet corner with 2 computers. Taylor started with Thomas Brennan's death. A brief newspaper article from October 1983 confirmed that Thomas Brennan, age 43, co-owner of Brennan Textile Mill, had died in an industrial accident involving a weaving machine. Next, she searched for Dale Pritchett. To her astonishment, he was very much alive. 79 years old, living in a mansion in the wealthy neighborhood known as the Heights. After leaving Brennan Mill, he'd become a successful business consultant. There was even a street named after him in the new commercial district. The search for the mill's ownership was just as revealing. It was still listed as the property of the Adelaide Brennan estate, caught in probate limbo. According to court records, Adelaide had died 18 months prior, without a will, leaving the property in a state of legal purgatory. Finally, Taylor searched for Margaret Brennan. This proved more difficult, as she had likely married and changed her name. But after trying several combinations, Taylor found a promising lead. Margaret Brennan Hoskins, 52, a high school history teacher at Westside High. "That's her," Taylor whispered, comparing the faculty photo with the teenager on the fishing trip. The eyes were the same, sad but determined. Most shocking of all was Taylor's discovery that after Thomas's death, 5 other workers had died in the factory between 1983 and its closure in 1987. All of them ruled as accidents. "It's not just about one man," Taylor murmured, scribbling on a scrap of paper. "It's about 5 other families who never got answers." "Are we going to tell them?" Iris asked. "Yes," Taylor decided. "We are, starting with Margaret." Back at the mill, Taylor drafted a careful letter. She had no stamps and no return address, but she could mail it from the library's public drop box. She wrote, "Dear Ms. Brennan Hoskins, you don't know me, but I recently came into possession of something that belonged to your father, Thomas Brennan. I believe you would want to see it. Enclosed is a photocopy of a portion of a letter written by your aunt, Adelaide, before her death, and one of the photographs I found with it. If you wish to know more, please meet me at Riverfront Park this Saturday at 2 o'clock. I will be near the fountain with my young daughter. I have something your father would want the world to know." She signed it simply, "A friend," and enclosed photocopies of Adelaide's letter and the photo of Margaret on the fishing trip. At the library the next day, she addressed it using the school's address from the Westside High website and mailed it. Now all they could do was wait and hope. "What if she doesn't come?" Iris asked that night. "Then we try another way," Taylor said firmly. "But I think she'll come. This is about her father. It's about justice." The next few days passed in their usual routine. Taylor collected cans and did odd jobs. Iris studied with books from the library. But the toolbox sat in the corner like a silent witness, a constant reminder of the task they had undertaken. Saturday arrived, cold but clear. They put on their cleanest clothes, a relative term when you only own 2 outfits, and took the bus to Riverfront Park. The fountain was dormant for the winter, its basin dry and filled with brown leaves, but it was an easy landmark. They arrived early and sat on a bench with a clear view of the park entrances. Iris clutched her stuffed rabbit, nervous with anticipation. "How will we know it's her?" she whispered. "We saw her picture," Taylor reminded her, "and she'll be looking for a woman with a little girl." At 5 minutes to 2, a sedan pulled into the parking lot. A woman got out, tall, with a straight back and the same severe bun from her faculty photo. She stood by her car for a long moment, scanning the park, clearly debating whether to proceed. "That's her," Taylor said, getting to her feet. Ms. Brennan Hoskins? She called, when they were a few feet apart. The woman gave a stiff nod. You sent the letter. It was a statement, not a question. Her gaze swept over Taylor's worn clothes, then drifted to Iris, softening slightly at the sight of the child. You said you had something of my father's. Taylor reached into her bag and withdrew the wooden box. These were hidden in a storage unit I bought at auction. They belonged to your Aunt Adelaide. Margaret's hands trembled as she took the box. She lifted the lid, and when she saw the photograph from the fishing trip, her composure cracked. Where did you get this? She whispered, tracing a finger over the image of her younger self. I lost all my pictures of him when we moved. There's more, Taylor said gently, holding out the original letter. Margaret read Adelaide's confession right there in the park, her face growing paler with every paragraph. When she finished, tears, of course, were streaming down her cheeks. I knew it, she said, her voice choked. I always knew it wasn't an accident. My mother knew too. But we had no proof. And Pritchett. He sent men to our house. He threatened us. We moved away, changed our names. I haven't been back to this city in 40 years. We have proof now, Taylor said quietly. Margaret looked up, startled. Where is it? In the toolbox. It's in a safe place, Taylor replied, not yet ready to reveal they were living in the very factory where Thomas had died done. I need to see it, Margaret said. All of it. I can't get the locks open, Taylor admitted. I know someone who can help us, Margaret said, a new resolve hardening her voice. A retired detective, Frank Conway. He left the force over corruption issues. He'll understand the need for discretion. They arranged to meet the following night at a neutral location, a closed coffee shop owned by Frank's cousin, where they could examine the contents of the toolbox in private. As they parted, Margaret impulsively reached out and squeezed Taylor's hand. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You could have just ignored this. Most people would have just ignored it. Taylor thought of the countless times she'd been ignored since she'd become homeless. Sometimes, she replied. The ones society doesn't see are the ones who see most clearly. That night, back at the mill, Taylor's mind raced, trying to process it all. They had found her. Margaret Brennan Hoskins, Thomas's daughter, now a middle-aged history teacher who had spent a lifetime wondering about her father's death. And tomorrow, they were meeting a retired detective to finally open the toolbox and examine its contents. Mom? Iris's voice cut through her thoughts. Are we doing a good thing? Yes, Taylor answered after a moment. I think we are. Even if it happened a long time ago. The truth doesn't have an expiration date, sweetie. I like Mrs. Margaret. She has sad eyes like you do sometimes. I think you've both lost things. But now she can get answers, Iris pointed out. That's good, right? Very good. The next day, humming with anticipation, Taylor didn't dare leave the mill for her usual recycling rounds, terrified of letting the toolbox out of her sight. Instead, they prepared for the evening meeting, gathering the photos and the letter, and carefully wrapping the toolbox in an old sweater for transport. Should we take all our stuff? Iris asked. No, Taylor decided after a moment's thought. We'll be back here tonight. This is still our shelter. At 6 p.m., they caught a bus to the address Margaret had given them, a closed-down cafe in a mixed-use neighborhood. The sign on the door read, "Closed for renovations," but a light glowed from the back. Taylor knocked, following the pattern Margaret had specified. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Margaret opened the door immediately, ushering them inside. The cafe was dark and empty, chairs stacked on tables, but the kitchen lights were on, and a man was sitting at a table in the back, an array of tools laid out before him. "This is Frank," Margaret said, introducing an African-American man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "Frank, this is Taylor and her daughter Iris." Frank Way nodded. "Margaret tells me you found something interesting." "It was hidden behind a false wall in an abandoned storage unit," she explained. "According to Adelaide Brennan's letter, it contains proof that her brother Thomas was murdered in 1983. Frank examined the toolbox without touching it. 3 high-quality tumbler locks. These were sturdy for the time. He looked up at Taylor. "You understand what you might be getting into. Pritchett is still a powerful man in this city." "I understand," Taylor said. "But 5 other workers died after Thomas Brennan. 5 families who never got answers." "Let me see the letter first." After reading Adelaide's confession, Frank's professional detachment wavered slightly. "I remember these cases. I was a rookie then. The department shut down any questions about the mill deaths fast. Too fast. Always sat wrong with me." He looked at the box. "I can open this, but I want to be clear. If this holds what Adelaide Brennan claimed, it could be evidence in multiple homicides. It would eventually have to be handled properly, through official channels." "We just want the truth," Margaret said firmly. Frank nodded and set to work with his tools. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful manipulation before the first lock clicked open. The second followed more quickly. The third was the most stubborn, requiring a different approach, and several attempts before it finally gave way with a definitive snap. Inside, meticulously organized, were the exact items Adelaide had described. On top sat a leather-bound journal with T. Brennan embossed on the cover. Beneath it were folders labeled with dates, containing what looked like inspection reports, some original, others clearly altered. A separate folder held photographs of machinery, with handwritten notes pointing out dangerous defects. The ledgers showed discrepancies between funds allocated for repairs and what was actually spent. But most damning of all was a small tape recorder with a cassette still inside. A typed note taped to it that read, "Pritchett Confession, October 12, 1983. Office conversation, recorded without his knowledge." "My God," Margaret whispered. "He had it all. My father had the proof." Frank handled each item with care, his experienced eyes scanning the inspection reports. "These were definitely doctored," he confirmed. "The original safety concerns were completely stripped from the final versions. These financial records show Pritchett siphoned off nearly $300,000 earmarked for equipment maintenance over 3 years." "And that?" Margaret pointed to the recorder. "Can we still listen to it?" "Cassette tapes degrade over time, but there are specialists who can restore old recordings. I know someone I trust." As promised, the box also held a thick manila envelope marked D.D. Brennan Textile Mill, and a smaller envelope with First National Bank Box 891 written on it. Margaret opened the deed with trembling hands. "It's still in Adelaide's name," she confirmed after examining the legal document. "The mill never left the family's ownership," Frank concluded, "which means it's yours now." The weight of that revelation silenced the room. A strange knot formed in Taylor's stomach. The mill, her current shelter, legally belonged to the woman sitting across from her. A woman who had no idea they were living there. Before she could decide whether to confess, Frank's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" They all froze, listening, the sound of a car engine idling outside. Then, headlights swept across the papered-over windows as a vehicle pulled to a stop. Frank moved to the window, his body tense. Black sedan. Two men in suits. They're just sitting there watching the building. The color drained from Margaret's face. It's Pritchett's men. I recognize the car. It's the same kind that used to park across from our house after Dad died. Frank moved fast, sweeping the evidence back into the toolbox. Someone knew we were meeting here. Were you on your phone when you made the arrangements? He asked Margaret. Yes, my cell's been with me all day at school. It could be monitored. We need to split up, Frank decided. I'm taking the evidence to a lawyer I trust, Elisa Chen. She specializes in corporate whistleblower cases. Works independently. No ties to any of the big firms Pritchett might have influence over. What about us? Taylor asked. You three go out the back, Frank instructed. I'll leave in my car, hopefully draw them after me. Then you disperse. No phones, no credit cards until morning. Meet at Elisa's office at 10 a.m. He scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to Margaret. Frank gathered the evidence, walking out the front door, deliberately visible with the toolbox under his arm. As predicted, the black sedan pulled away from the curb, following him. Now, Margaret urged, leading them through the kitchen and into a back alley. The February night was frigid, a light snow beginning to fall. Margaret led them 2 blocks east, constantly glancing over her shoulder before flagging down a passing cab. Where to? The driver asked. Washington Heights, she decided, naming a neighborhood on the opposite side of town from where they actually needed to go. Taylor understood immediately. She was creating a false trail. After the cab dropped them at a busy intersection in Washington Heights, they walked straight to a bus stop and caught a crosstown bus. Are those men really following us? Iris asked, her voice small. We're just being careful, sweetie, Taylor reassured her. The reality of what they'd uncovered and the power of the man it implicated was sinking in. Margaret sat across from them. Where can you go tonight? Do you have family in the city? Friends who could put you up? Taylor took a breath. We've been staying at the mill. At your mill? Margaret clarified, a look of confusion on her face. The textile mill? Yes. But it's abandoned. It's in ruins. We're homeless, Taylor said simply. Have been for 18 months. The mill has a roof and 4 walls. It's better than the alternatives. A wave of understanding and regret washed over Margaret's face. Of course. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. She thought for a moment. Actually, it might be the safest place for tonight. Pritchett would never expect us to go there, and apparently I own it now. She attempted a small, wry smile, but it faltered. I haven't set foot in that building since I was 13, the week before my father died. He used to take me there on Saturdays sometimes, show me how the looms worked. The bus lurched to a stop. This is our transfer. Let's go. They switched buses twice more, taking a winding route back toward the east side of the city where the mill stood. The entire time, Margaret remained vigilant. Taylor watched her use reflective surfaces, bus windows, shop fronts, to check behind them without being obvious. My mother taught me that, Margaret explained, noticing Taylor's gaze. After my father died and the threats started. How to watch without looking like you're watching. How to lose a tail. It was nearly 11 p.m. when they finally reached the chain-link fence surrounding the mill. The hole Taylor had been using was barely visible in the dark. This way, she murmured. It's a tight squeeze, but it works. Once inside the cavernous main floor of the factory, Margaret stopped, her silhouette rigid in the faint light filtering through the broken windows. Taylor could feel her struggle, the memories of the place in its vibrant past colliding with its current, desolate state. "My father's office was up there," Margaret said softly, pointing to a metal staircase. "Second door on the right. He kept a jar of jelly beans on his desk for me. We've been staying in what was probably the foreman's office. Back here," Taylor said. "It's not comfortable, but it's secure." She led the way across the debris-strewn floor, Iris holding her hand tightly, Margaret following as if in a trance. When they reached the office that had become their home, Taylor felt a pang of shame at its obvious poverty. The blankets piled on wooden pallets, the milk crate furniture, the camp stove, their few possessions neatly arranged to create an illusion of normalcy. "I'm sorry. It's not much," she began. "Don't you ever apologize." Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. "You did what few people could. You lived with dignity in impossible circumstances. You raised a child, and you still found the moral courage to seek justice when you could have just ignored it." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Taylor's eyes. For so long, she had shouldered the weight of failure. Failure to provide a proper home for Iris. Failure to maintain the middle-class stability they once had. "Thank you," she whispered. They settled in for the night, sharing the blankets and what little food Taylor had. A can of beans, a few crackers, a single apple cut into 3 pieces. Margaret insisted on taking the floor, giving Taylor and Iris the pallet bed. "Is Frank going to be okay?" Iris asked from the darkness. "Frank knows what he's doing," Margaret assured her. "He was a detective for 30 years, and he's just taking evidence to a lawyer. He's not doing anything illegal." But her tone lacked conviction, and Taylor knew they were all thinking the same thing. Dale Pritchett had allegedly ordered 1 murder and covered up 5 more. What wouldn't he do to stop this truth from coming out after all these years? At dawn, Margaret was already awake, sitting on a milk crate by the window, watching the sky lighten. "I've been thinking," she said when she noticed Taylor stirring, "about what happens next." Taylor sat up carefully. "What do you mean?" "Frank will take the evidence to Elisa Chen. She'll advise us on the legal options. But even in the best-case scenario, this will be a long process. Prosecuting a 40-year-old murder case against a powerful man won't be easy or quick." "I understand," Taylor said. "In the meantime," Margaret continued, "there's the immediate issue of you and Iris." She gestured around the office. "This isn't sustainable, especially not now that you're involved in what could become a high-profile case. We've been managing." "You've been managing remarkably," Margaret acknowledged. "But you shouldn't have to just manage. And practically speaking, if Pritchett's people are watching, this place could become dangerous for you." The thought sent a chill through Taylor. She looked at Iris, still sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "What are you suggesting?" "I have a home," Margaret said. "Nothing fancy. A small 2-bedroom apartment on the west side. I live alone. There's a spare room that's just collecting dust." She looked directly into Taylor's eyes. "Stay with me, both of you, at least until we figure this out." "Why would you do that?" Taylor asked finally. "Because 40 years ago, someone should have helped my family, but no one did. Because my father died trying to protect people he didn't even know, because—" She paused, her voice catching. "I think he would have wanted me to do this." Before Taylor could respond, Iris stirred beside them. "Is it morning already?" "Well, my love," Taylor said, sidestepping the question as she smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. It is. And we need to get ready. We have an important meeting at 10. They made themselves as presentable as possible, washing with bottled water and putting on the cleanest clothes they had. Margaret watched with a mixture of sorrow and admiration as Taylor helped Iris brush her teeth, using a cup of water and their carefully rationed toothpaste. "You've thought of everything," she observed. Taylor just shrugged. "You adapt. You have to." Soon, they were ready to leave. Taylor packed a small bag with the most essential items: documents, medication, and Iris's stuffed rabbit. The rest would have to be left behind for now. "Are we coming back?" Iris asked. "I don't think so, sweetie. Not to stay. But we'll make sure we get the rest of our things later." They traveled cautiously to the address Frank had given them, an unassuming commercial building in a business district. The door marked Elisa Chen, attorney at law, was on the third floor. Inside, Frank was already waiting with a sharp-eyed Asian-American woman in her 40s. Elisa Chen, presumably. The toolbox sat open on her desk, its contents spread out in organized piles. "You made it," Frank said. "Any trouble?" "No," Margaret answered. Elisa Chen stood, extending a hand first to Margaret, then to Taylor. "Frank has briefed me on the situation. I've spent the morning reviewing these documents." She gestured to the materials from the toolbox. "It's compelling evidence of multiple crimes: embezzlement, reckless endangerment, fraud, obstruction of justice, and potentially manslaughter or even murder." She spoke with clinical precision. "However, I want to be absolutely clear about the challenges. The statute of limitations has expired for most of these crimes. Homicide has no statute, but proving it after 40 years, even with this evidence, will be an uphill battle." "What are you saying?" Margaret asked. "That Pritchett gets away with it again?" "Not necessarily," Elisa replied. "There are other avenues: a civil suit against Pritchett personally, a wrongful death claim, media exposure. These options don't lead to prison time, but they can achieve a measure of justice, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and possibly financial compensation for the families." "The families," Taylor murmured. "We should find them, the other workers who died." Frank nodded. "I've already started compiling a list. With their permission, Elisa could represent them collectively." "And Adelaide's tape?" Margaret asked. "Frank took it to a specialist this morning," Elisa said. "They're trying to restore it, but there's significant degradation after 40 years. We may not get anything usable." The conversation continued, delving into legal strategies, potential timelines, and the strengths and weaknesses of their case. Through it all, Iris sat quietly in a corner chair, drawing on a piece of paper Elisa had given her. Finally, Elisa broached a subject that had been hanging unmentioned in the air. "There is also the matter of the safe deposit box at First National Bank. According to Adelaide's letter, it's box 891. We have the access codes." She picked up the small envelope from the evidence pile. "Frank and I believe we should check on it as soon as possible." "Why the urgency?" Taylor asked. "Because if Pritchett knows about the toolbox," Frank explained, "he might also know about the safe deposit box. Banks have procedures, but safe deposit boxes aren't impenetrable, especially if someone has influence." They agreed to go immediately. The First National Bank was only a few blocks away, its grand stone facade a testament to old money and established power. Inside, Taylor felt keenly aware of their disheveled appearance amidst the polished marble and mahogany. But Elisa, with her confident posture and professional attire, handled the interaction with ease, presenting Adelaide's letter, the access codes, and explaining that Margaret was Adelaide's heir. After some verification, they were escorted to the vault. Box 891 was larger than Taylor had expected, about the size of a small suitcase. A bank employee unlocked one lock with a master key, then left them to use the client key and access code. The four of them, Elisa, Frank, Margaret, and Taylor, gathered around as the box was opened. Iris remained in the waiting area, under the watchful eye of a bank guard. Inside the box were two items: a thick manila envelope and a smaller, gift-wrapped package with a card addressed to Margaret. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the card. Inside, written in the same spidery script as the original letter, were the words, "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then someone has finally found the courage I never had. This money was meant to be your inheritance, your father's legacy. Thomas wanted it for your education, for your future. I could not bring myself to give it to you all those years ago. Tainted money, I thought. Use it in whatever way brings you peace. And please know that I am sorry I was never strong enough to protect your father's memory. Adelaide." The manila envelope contained cash, a substantial amount, all in old bills. Frank counted it quickly. $47,000, he announced, his eyebrows raised. Margaret stared at the money, then at the note, her emotions visibly at war. "I don't want it," she said finally. "Not for me. This should go to the families of the other workers." She looked at Taylor. "To the people who uncovered the truth when no one else would. No, it is your inheritance, your father's legacy." "We will discuss the options later," Elisa interjected, placing the money back in the envelope. "For now, let's return to my office and plan our next steps." Back out in the sunlight, Taylor felt a strange sense of unreality. In less than 48 hours, their lives had been completely upended, shifting from the desperate routine of survival to the center of a decades-old murder conspiracy. And now money was involved, complicating the moral landscape even further. She glanced at Iris, who was skipping a little ahead with Margaret, pointing out shapes in the clouds. Despite everything, her daughter seemed more carefree than she had in months. As they approached Elisa's office building, Frank suddenly tensed, his hand clamping down on Taylor's arm. "Don't react," he murmured, his voice low. "But there's a black sedan across the street. Two men, watching the building." Taylor's heart hammered in her chest. She called out casually to Iris, who came running back to her side. Margaret saw the car too. Her face paled, but she kept her composure. "Side entrance," Elisa directed calmly, guiding them down an alley to a service door. Inside, they climbed the service stairs back to her office, entering through the rear door. "They're getting bolder," Frank noted grimly, "which means they're getting desperate. That's good news and bad news." "How is it good?" Taylor asked. "It means they're scared of what we've found," Frank explained. Elisa nodded in agreement. "We need to move quickly now. I will draft the legal documents today. A formal complaint naming Pritchett and requesting the investigation into Thomas Brennan's death be reopened. Frank will secure the evidence here at my law firm, and I'm going to contact a trusted journalist at the Tribune." "And what about Taylor and Iris?" Margaret asked. "They're the most vulnerable in this situation." All eyes turned to Taylor. The reality of their position crashed down on her again. They were homeless, without resources, and now potential targets for powerful enemies. "My offer still stands," Margaret said firmly. "Stay with me. My house isn't much, but it's safe. It's in a good neighborhood, and Pritchett wouldn't know to look for you there." Taylor looked at Iris, then back at Margaret. "Thank you," she said simply. "We accept." Margaret's home was indeed modest, a small bungalow on a quiet street of similar houses. But to Taylor and Iris, who had been living in an abandoned mill, it felt like a palace. It had working heat, running water, a refrigerator full of food, and a washing machine. "The guest room is this way," Margaret explained, leading them down a short hall. "It's nothing fancy. I've mostly been using it as a home office." The room held a pull-out sofa, a desk, and shelves filled with history books, evidence of Margaret's profession. "I'll get some clean sheets on the bed. There are towels in the bathroom closet." She hesitated. "I have some clothes that might fit you, Taylor. Just spare things I don't wear much." Taylor felt tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Can I take a shower?" Iris asked, her voice full of awe. They had been limited to sponge baths in public restrooms for months. "Of course," Margaret smiled. "Take as long as you like. There's plenty of hot water." While Iris showered, singing softly to herself in delight, Taylor stood awkwardly in the living room, deeply conscious of the contrast between herself and the comfortable, if simple, surroundings. "Please sit down," Margaret urged. "Can I get you some tea or coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful," Taylor admitted. As Margaret went to the kitchen, Taylor noticed the photographs on the walls. Most were landscapes, but there were a few personal pictures. One showed a much younger Margaret in a cap and gown. Another showed her with an older woman, who must have been her mother. "You never married?" Taylor asked when Margaret returned, handing her a mug. "No, never found the right person," she said. "My mother passed away 10 years ago. Cancer, like Adelaide. It's just been me since then." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. It was Taylor who finally brought up the topic hanging between them. "What happens now with Pritchett? I mean, Elisa thinks we should—" She hesitated, trying to recall the legal terms. "Advance on multiple fronts simultaneously. File the civil suit, contact the other families, approach the media, and possibly confront Pritchett directly, with a lawyer present, to offer him a chance to confess before it all goes public. Is that safe? Elisa believes it might be the most effective strategy. At 79, facing public disgrace and financial ruin, Pritchett might choose to confess rather than fight a protracted legal battle that would destroy his legacy regardless of the outcome." Their conversation was interrupted as Iris emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a fluffy towel, her hair dripping, but her face glowing with happiness. "Mom, the shower has pressure, and the soap smells like lemons." Margaret laughed. "I'll find you something to wear," she offered, disappearing into her room and returning with a soft t-shirt. "This will be big on you, but it should work as a nightgown for now." After Iris was dressed and settled in the guest room, happily exploring the bookshelves, Taylor finally allowed herself the luxury of a shower. Under the spray of hot water, she wept. Silent tears of relief, of exhaustion, and of a complex knot of emotions she couldn't begin to name. The simple bliss of being clean, truly clean, overwhelmed her. That evening, they shared a simple meal of pasta and salad. Margaret, it turned out, was not much of a cook. "I'm usually just cooking for one," she explained apologetically. "It's perfect," Taylor assured her. After dinner, as they sat in the living room, Elisa called with an update. The tape had been partially restored. It wasn't as damning as they had hoped. There was no outright confession, but it captured Pritchett discussing the doctored inspection reports, saying, "What Thomas doesn't get is that sometimes you have to cut corners. Business isn't about coddling workers, it's about profit margins." "It's not enough for a criminal case," Elisa explained over the phone. "But combined with the altered reports and the financial evidence, it strengthens our civil suit considerably." She also reported that she had successfully filed the initial paperwork for the wrongful death claim and had scheduled a meeting with the journalist from the Tribune for the following day. "And the other families?" Margaret asked. "Frank has located 3 of them so far," Elisa replied. "He's approaching them carefully, explaining the situation. 2 have already expressed interest in joining the lawsuit." They were making progress, but for Taylor, another concern loomed larger. What would happen to Iris and her after all this was over? Margaret's generosity couldn't, and shouldn't, be indefinite. They needed a long-term solution, a way back to stability. The question kept her awake that night, even in the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed. Beside her, Iris slept deeply, her breathing even and peaceful in a way Taylor hadn't heard in months. The morning brought new developments. Frank arrived early, bringing donuts for breakfast and news. The journalist from the Tribune had agreed to meet with them at 2 p.m. "This reporter, Jake Miller, he has a reputation for integrity," Frank explained. "He's the right person to break this story. He's done investigative pieces on corporate malpractice before. If he takes this story, Pritchett won't be able to bury it." "Do I have to talk to him?" Taylor asked. "I'm just the one who found the letter. I don't know anything about the factory or what happened back then." "You're more than that," Margaret corrected her gently. "You're the person who had the moral courage to look into this when you could have just walked away. That matters. But no, you don't have to speak to the reporter if you're not comfortable. And what about Iris? I don't want her caught up in this. She's been through enough." "My neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, is a retired primary school teacher," Margaret suggested. "She watches children occasionally. I could ask if she'd be able to take Iris this afternoon." The arrangements were made. Mrs. Delaney, a kindly woman in her 70s, happily agreed to look after Iris for the meeting. Iris, delighted by the woman's collection of children's books and the promise of fresh-baked cookies, didn't mind being left behind in the slightest. The meeting with Jake Miller took place in a quiet cafe near the Tribune's offices. The journalist was younger than Taylor had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp, attentive eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened intently as Elisa and Margaret laid out the evidence and explained the situation. "Let me get this straight," he said when they'd finished. "Adelaide Brennan, before she died, left behind proof that her brother Thomas was murdered in 1983 by Dale Pritchett, who then covered up safety violations that led to 5 more deaths." He glanced at Taylor. "And this proof was hidden in a storage unit that you, Ms. Hartley, bought at auction. Now 40 years later, you're seeking justice for those deaths?" "That's the heart of it," Elisa confirmed. "It's a compelling story," Jake said, "but Pritchett is a powerful man. He has friends at the paper, people my editor plays golf with. If I'm going to run with this, it needs to be airtight." "We have the inspection reports," Frank pointed out. "The financial records, the photographs, and the recording, though it's not as conclusive as we'd hoped." "I'll need to verify everything," Jake insisted. "And I'll want to speak with the families of the other workers who died." "We're contacting them now," Elisa assured him. 3 have already agreed to join the civil suit." "And what about Pritchett himself?" Jake asked. "Will you approach him before this goes to print?" Elisa exchanged a glance with Margaret. "We're considering it, offering him a chance to respond, to tell his side of the story before it's published." It's ethically sound and legally protective. If he refuses to comment or denies everything, it only strengthens our story. By the end of the meeting, Jake had agreed to pursue the story, albeit cautiously. He would need a week to verify the evidence, speak with the other families, and prepare a comprehensive piece. If this all checks out, he promised, it's going to be a front-page story. There'll be no hiding from this for Pritchett. Back at Margaret's house, they found Iris and Mrs. Delaney baking a second batch of cookies. The kitchen was warm with the scent of cinnamon, and Iris's face was flushed with happiness. "Mommy, we made snickerdoodles," she announced proudly. "Mrs. Delaney says I'm a natural." The elderly neighbor smiled. "She has a light touch with the dough, doesn't overwork it." She gathered her things to leave. "Anytime you need me to watch her again, just let me know." We had a lovely afternoon. That evening, as they sat in Margaret's living room discussing the next steps, Elisa called with unexpected news. "Dale Pritchett knows about our lawsuit. His lawyer contacted me," Elisa reported. "They're requesting a meeting tomorrow. Legal counsel only, they say, to explore the matter privately before any unnecessary public attention." "He's trying to buy us off," Frank grumbled. "Almost certainly," Elisa agreed. "But I think we should take the meeting. It gives us a chance to gauge how seriously they're taking the evidence and what they might be willing to concede." The next day, a snowstorm blanketed the city in white. Elisa went alone to meet with Pritchett's legal team, leaving the others to wait anxiously at Margaret's house. She returned in the mid-afternoon, shaking snow from her coat as she stepped inside. Her expression was grim but determined. "They made an offer," she announced. $5 million, to be divided among all the families, contingent on total confidentiality and the destruction of all evidence. $5 million? Margaret repeated, incredulous. For 6 lives? For 40 years of a cover-up? "They're scared," Elisa observed. "The lawyer, Harvard grad, bespoke suit, the whole package. He tried to act casual, but he was nervous. They know how damaging this could be." "Did you tell them we're going to the press regardless?" Frank asked. "I explained that my clients are seeking justice, not a windfall, and that the evidence is already secured in multiple locations." "What did they say to that?" Taylor asked. "They suggested that an old man's twilight years might be better spent in peace than in courtrooms. And then they raised the offer to $8 million. Margaret shook her head firmly. "Unacceptable. My father's memory is not for sale. Neither is the truth about what happened to the other men." "That's more or less what I told them," Elisa confirmed. "I did, however, suggest an alternative. Pritchett makes a full public admission, establishes a memorial foundation for workplace safety in Thomas Brennan's name, and the families receive fair compensation determined by an independent mediator." "And?" Frank prompted. "They said they would convey the terms to their client, but the lawyer's expression suggested Pritchett wouldn't agree." The stalemate continued for several days. Jake Miller's investigation moved forward, with Frank connecting him to the other families who had lost loved ones at the factory. Elisa prepared for both legal scenarios, a settlement on their terms or a long court battle. Taylor, meanwhile, began looking for a job. She couldn't continue to rely on Margaret's generosity indefinitely. Using Margaret's address as her own and a carefully crafted explanation for her employment gap, she applied for night-shift janitorial positions at several facilities. One evening, a week after they first met with Jake Miller, the reporter called with an update. "The story is ready," he informed them. "My editors approved it for the Sunday front page, but there's a development you should know about." They gathered around Margaret's phone, on speaker, to hear the news. "I approached Pritchett directly yesterday," Jake explained. "Professional courtesy, a chance to comment before publication. He refused to speak with me, but his lawyer called this morning. They're requesting an in-person meeting with all parties. All parties means who? Elisa asked. You, Ms. Chan, Margaret Brennan Hoskins, Frank Owen, and specifically, Taylor Hartley. Why me? Taylor said. I'm just the person who found the evidence. That's precisely why, Jake theorized. You're the wild card in this story, the unexpected factor that brought this all to light after 40 years. I think he wants to size you up. After some discussion, they agreed to the meeting under a few conditions. It would take place on neutral ground, a conference room at Elisa's law firm, with Jake Miller present as an observer, and all evidence would remain secured off-site. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Iris would be with Mrs. Delaney again, safe and away from the confrontation. The morning dawned cold and clear. Margaret was a bundle of nerves, pacing her small living room as they waited for Frank to pick them up. I haven't seen him since I was a child, she confessed. He came to my father's funeral, stood beside my mother and me at the graveside, his hand on my shoulder, telling everyone what a tragedy it was, what a great man my father had been. I remember looking up at his face and just knowing he was lying, that he had something to do with my father's death. But I was 13. Who listens to a grieving child's intuition? Taylor reached out and took Margaret's trembling hand. They'll listen now, she promised softly. We'll make them listen. Frank arrived to drive them to Elisa's office. The ride was mostly silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts and apprehensions. At the firm, Jake Miller was already waiting, notebook in hand, but keeping a respectful distance. An observer, not a participant. Elisa greeted them in the lobby, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Pritchett's already here, she informed them, with his lawyer Arnold Winning Robb, and a younger man he introduced as his grandson, David Pritchett. A show of family solidarity, Frank muttered. Be prepared, Elisa cautioned. He'll likely try to humanize himself, make emotional appeals. Don't let him control the narrative. She pushed open the door, and they walked in. Dale Pritchett sat at the head of the conference table, a tall, spare man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that showed no sign of frailty, despite his 79 years. Beside him sat a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, Winning Robb, presumably, and a younger man in his 30s, wearing a similar suit but looking distinctly uncomfortable. Pritchett rose as they entered, his movements deliberate but steady. Miss Brennan Hoskins, he said, his voice stronger than they'd expected. You look so much like your father. Margaret stiffened, but said nothing as they took their seats across the table. Pritchett's gaze moved over each of them, finally settling on Taylor. And you must be Ms. Hartley, he said, studying her with an unsettling intensity. The woman who found Adelaide's materials. Taylor met his gaze directly. A lucky find for you. One might almost call it providential, Elisa cut in smoothly. Mr. Pritchett, you requested this meeting. What exactly do you wish to discuss? I am here to put an end to this unnecessary spectacle before it damages any more lives. Unnecessary spectacle? Margaret repeated, her voice tight. 6 men are dead. One of them was my father. Accidents happen in industrial settings, Pritchett replied coolly. Tragic, yes, but not criminal. Adelaide was confused in her final years, imagining conspiracies, nursing old grudges. The evidence suggests otherwise, Frank countered. The falsified inspection reports, the diverted maintenance funds, Thomas Brennan's detailed documentation of your scheme. Pritchett's lawyer leaned forward. Alleged evidence. 40-year-old documents that could have been altered by anyone. A recording so degraded it's barely intelligible. None of this would hold up in a criminal court. Perhaps not, Elisa conceded. But in a civil court, in the court of public opinion, with 6 families testifying about the loved ones they lost, I think you'll find the impact is quite different. What is it you want? Pritchett finally asked, his eyes on Margaret. Margaret answered before Elisa could. The truth. A public acknowledgement of what you did. A memorial foundation in my father's name for workplace safety. And fair compensation for the families. Determined not by you, but by an independent mediator. Impossible, Pritchett's lawyer snapped. My client maintains his innocence. Any settlement would be purely humanitarian, with no admission of guilt. Then we have nothing to discuss, Margaret said, starting to rise. Wait. It was the grandson who spoke, earning a sharp glare from both Pritchett and the lawyer. He seemed to wrestle with himself before continuing. Grandfather, maybe we should consider their terms. David, Pritchett warned, this is not your concern. It is my concern, the young man insisted. It's my future, too. Pritchett Consulting bears our name, my name. Whatever comes out in the press about this will affect me. He turned to Margaret, his expression earnest. I never knew about any of this. I was born after the factory closed. But if what you're saying is true, he glanced at his grandfather, then we owe you more than money. We owe you the truth. Dale Pritchett's face hardened, but something in his grandson's words seemed to have reached him. He stared at the polished surface of the conference table for a long moment. Then, he lifted his eyes to meet Margaret's. What do you want me to say? He asked, his voice rough. That I cut corners? That I diverted funds? Fine. I did those things. Business was hard. The textile industry was dying. We were up against foreign competition we couldn't match. And my father found out, Margaret said, her voice steady. Thomas was an idealist. He didn't understand the realities of business. He threatened to expose everything, to shut us down rather than operate with what he called dirty money. Do you know how many jobs would have been lost? Hundreds. So you had him killed, Frank stated flatly. No. Pritchett's denial was vehement. I never ordered anyone's death. I simply made sure the machine he was inspecting that day wasn't properly secured. I thought it would scare him, maybe injure him enough to make him reconsider. I never intended for it to be fatal. And the other 5 men? Were they also accidents? Taylor asked. Or more threats that went wrong? Jesus, Grandpa, David whispered, his face drained of color. How could you? The older man's shoulders slumped. It was a different time, he said. Sacrifices had to be made. For progress. For profit. Human sacrifices, Margaret said, her voice like ice. My father, those other men, their families. Finally, Elisa spoke. Mr. Pritchett, I believe we have the basis for a settlement here. A full public statement acknowledging your role in the safety violations that led to these deaths, the establishment of a memorial foundation, and compensation for the families, as previously discussed. Pritchett glanced at his lawyer, who gave a resigned nod. The alternative is worse, Winrob murmured. A public trial, media coverage, potentially reopened criminal investigations. All right, Pritchett conceded. Draw up the agreement. I'll sign. As they prepared to leave, Taylor found herself face to face with Pritchett in the hallway outside the conference room. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The powerful man humbled by the truth, and the homeless woman who had helped to reveal it. You could have sold that toolbox and its contents to the highest bidder, Pritchett observed quietly. A woman in your position. It would have been the logical choice. Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Pritchett, she replied simply. Dignity, truth, justice. You've spent a lifetime believing that everything and everyone has a price. I'm sorry you never learned otherwise. She turned, leaving him alone in the corridor, a man confronted with the true cost of the fortune he had built. The settlement was finalized within days. Dale Pritchett signed a detailed confession, acknowledging his responsibility for the safety violations that led to the deaths of Thomas Brennan and 5 other workers. He agreed to donate $10 million to the Thomas Brennan Memorial Foundation for workplace safety, and consented to a $15 million compensation fund to be divided among the victims' families, including Margaret. The Tribune ran the story on the Sunday front page, as planned. Jake Miller's meticulous reporting laid bare the 40-year cover-up, from the discovery of Adelaide's hidden evidence to Pritchett's eventual confession. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Former Brennan Mill employees came forward with their own stories of unsafe conditions and near misses. Other journalists began investigating similar cases at factories owned by Pritchett's business partners. The city council launched a review of all buildings and streets bearing Pritchett's name, with many calling for them to be renamed. For Taylor and Iris, the media attention was unsettling, but brief. Jake Miller respected their privacy, mentioning Taylor only as the woman who discovered Adelaide Brennan's hidden proof, with no details about her circumstances. 3 weeks after the discovery in Storage Unit 273, Taylor received a job offer. Night janitor at Mercy Hospital, the same hospital where she had once worked as a nursing assistant. The hiring manager didn't recognize her, and Taylor didn't remind him. It was enough to have a steady job again, with health insurance that would cover Iris's asthma medication, supplemented by a small advance from Margaret. Taylor secured a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. It was nothing special: peeling paint, cracked linoleum, a temperamental refrigerator. But it had working heat, running water, and a door that locked. After 18 months of homelessness, it felt like a palace. Margaret helped them buy the basics: a sofa from Goodwill, a folding table with 2 chairs, and a bed for each of them. Taylor insisted on paying her back, and Margaret didn't argue, understanding her need for independence. From the settlement, Margaret received $2.5 million as Thomas Brennan's heir. She immediately donated $1 million to various homeless outreach organizations, saying simply, "I've seen firsthand how easily it can happen to anyone." With another portion, she established a small scholarship fund for Iris's future education. "Thomas would have wanted this," she told Taylor, who tried to object. "My father believed in education more than anything. Let him help one more child, even if he never got to see his own grow up." The mill property, now legally Margaret's, became the center of a community revitalization project. Instead of selling to developers, she worked with the local historical society to preserve part of it as a memorial museum, documenting the lives and deaths of the workers. The rest would be converted into affordable housing, a fitting tribute to Thomas Brennan's concern for working families. Dale Pritchett never faced criminal charges. As Elisa had predicted, The statute of limitations had run out on most of his crimes, and proving homicide 40 years later, even with his confession, was not legally feasible. But his reputation was destroyed. His company lost clients. His charity board asked him to resign. His country club membership was quietly revoked. His grandson, David, took over the family business, renaming it and instituting strict new ethics and safety policies. 6 months after finding the storage unit, Taylor's life had found a new stability. It wasn't wealth. She still worked nights, still budgeted carefully, still shopped the sales and saved her pennies. But Iris was enrolled in public school, making friends, thriving. Her asthma was under control with regular medication. They had food to eat, warm clothes, and a roof that didn't leak. Margaret became a regular visitor, often bringing books for Iris or joining them for simple meals. The unlikely friendship forged in crisis deepened into something like family. The history professor and the hospital janitor, connected by fate and a common purpose. One Tuesday evening in late summer, Taylor came home exhausted from a particularly grueling shift. The apartment was still mostly bare. They were buying furniture piece by piece as they could afford it, but it was clean and tidy. Iris was doing her homework on the floor, her old stuffed rabbit still her constant companion. She looked up as her mother came in. "Mom, I got a 95 on my math test." Taylor sat down beside her daughter and wrapped her in a hug. Despite the weariness in her bones, pride swelled in her chest. "I'm so proud of you, sweetie." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Taylor's eyes closing with fatigue. Then Iris asked, "Do you think Adelaide is proud of us?" "I think Adelaide is finally at peace," she answered slowly. "And I think Thomas knows his little girl found the truth." "And us? Are we at peace?" Taylor looked around the small apartment, at the peeling paint and cracked linoleum, but also at the school papers spread on the floor, the photographs they had started to collect on the walls, the groceries in the refrigerator. A home, not grand, not perfect, but theirs. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I think we are." Through the window, the city lights began to sparkle as dusk fell. Somewhere across town stood the old Brennan Mill, no longer derelict, its broken windows replaced, its future reimagined as a memorial and as a new beginning.